Super Mario Bros. Is one of the quintessential video games, and I don't think anyone's gonna disagree with me when I say that. It not only spawned a massive franchise consisting of sequels, spin-offs, movies, cartoons, etc., but it also laid the groundwork for the platformer genre of video games. Many games have taken influence from Super Mario Bros., such as Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Sonic the Hedgehog, and one such game is Braid, a 2008 indie game developed by Jonathan Blow. Braid seems to take direct inspiration from the original Super Mario Bros., bringing back several key elements and subverting them in order to make a statement about some of the tropes found within the original Super Mario Bros. To begin this analysis, let's talk about how Super Mario Bros. Plays, and then compare it to how Braid plays and how it intentionally subverts the gameplay of Super Mario Bros. In Super Mario Bros., you take control of Mario and, in two-player co-op mode, his brother Luigi, and you have to navigate them through these obstacle course-like levels full of hazards, enemies, and bottomless pits. Each level is bookended by a flagpole that Mario or Luigi grabs onto and slides down before proceeding to the next level. Every 4 levels, you go into a castle where you have to fight Bowser, Princess Peach's kidnapper, in a small boss fight before proceeding to the next world. Each world increases in difficulty and complexity until World 8, the final world, where your skills are put to the ultimate test, and once you finish Bowser for the final time, you finally rescue Princess Peach. The Mario Brothers aren't equipped with much out of the gate. They can run and jump, requiring only one button to jump and another button to hold down to make them run. They are also quite fragile. They take only 1 hit of damage to be killed. And if you die too many times and lose all of your lives, then you get a game over and are forced to restart the game from the beginning. Thankfully, there are power-ups in the game that allow Mario and Luigi to upgrade their health temporarily and gain new abilities, which they will lose upon taking damage. Typically, the levels are designed in such a way that require you to use your jumping abilities to navigate them. Often the ground or platforms that you stand on are spaced apart in between bottomless pits and have tons of other hazards, such as moving platforms and enemies, to get in the way of your ability to navigate these levels. The game starts off fairly light with Goombas, small brown creatures that just walk back and forth and that can be easily jumped on, as well as piranha plants which come in and out of the pipes littered across the levels at set intervals. However, the enemies gradually become more complex, and require you to use your head to defeat them or just avoid them. This gameplay loop of navigating the player character across these tight obstacle courses is the foundation for which future platformers have been built off of. And this is precisely where Braid comes in. Braid is functionally and to a degree aesthetically very similar. You take control of a man named Tim and must similarly navigate through these obstacle course type levels, which contain enemies that are strikingly similar to ones found in Super Mario Bros. Where Braid significantly differs from Super Mario Bros. Is how it handles death. Rather than having a life system like Super Mario Bros., where you are punished for making mistakes with the threat of being sent back to the beginning, Braid allows you to reverse time at the press of a button, effectively allowing you to undo your mistakes on the fly without any repercussions. However, the levels are designed around this. You can technically just go to the end of the level like in Super Mario Bros., but that won't get you very far. Instead, to progress through the game overall, you need to collect these puzzle pieces that are scattered throughout the levels, and often getting them is not so simple as finding them and grabbing them. Instead, there are puzzles that are designed around your time reversal ability and force you to use it creatively so as to be able to collect the piece without accidentally undoing progress. Additionally, each world contains special mechanics that complement your time reversal mechanic that make the task of acquiring the puzzle pieces even harder. In essence, Super Mario Bros. Is a game about always moving forward and never looking back, which is sort of emphasized by the fact that the screen locks behind you, meaning you can't backtrack in Super Mario Bros. Meanwhile, with Braid, by forcing you to constantly reverse time to progress, it's a game that's constantly about looking back and reflecting on your past decisions in order to move forward. This is a core theme with Braid, and in my opinion, the narrative pushes this idea even further. Jonathan Austenson writes about narratives in video games and how impactful they can be. However, to start, he states that there are some narratives in games which only exist to contextualize gameplay, and he labels Mario as one of them. At face value, he is not incorrect. Super Mario Bros. Follows Mario and Luigi, who must brave the dangers of the Mushroom Kingdom to rescue Princess Peach from King Bowser, who has kidnapped her in hopes of taking over the Mushroom Kingdom. As you go through the game, there aren't really any major plot points that occur in between levels. It's mostly just you go through the levels, and at the end of each castle, you find out that the princess is not in that castle, thus encouraging you to keep going. However, Sharon R. Sherman has argued that there's more to Mario's story than just that. She draws comparisons between the premise of Super Mario Bros. And the monomyth by Joseph Campbell, as outlined in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, arguing that the gameplay and story elements represent key aspects of the monomyth, such as how the player respawns upon dying as opposed to just permanently dying as you would in real life, as well as the various power-ups and enemies and worlds he encounters through his quest. She states, and I quote, "Mario is but one example, but he is the one most children know best. Mario acts out the monomyth. He begins in an ordinary setting, travels through enchanted forests, goes to the underworld, overcomes demons, has supernatural helpers, the imprisoned mushroom people, is constantly reborn in new worlds, eventually saves the princess by slaying a dragon, and thus breaks the spell. Hence he brings boons to society." End quote. This ties back into what I was saying with the gameplay. It's all about moving forward and not questioning things. You just sort of take it for granted that you're this representation of this traditional hero and archetype, and that it's your job to save the day, no questions asked. One area where Austenson and Sherman almost certainly agree is on interactivity. Austenson argued that part of why video game stories are so unique is that they are inherently participatory. Both authors argue that this allows the players to see themselves in the heroes and view themselves as part of the story rather than being sucked into someone else's story. Sherman notes that this can make players feel as if they themselves are a hero and embody these heroic traits and can perform these heroic feats because they are doing it in the game. Once again, this is an example of how games like Super Mario Bros. Don't really ask you to question anything. Part of their main appeal is to get to feel like the hero of the day, and this is where Braid comes in. Much like how Braid's gameplay is pretty derivative of Super Mario Bros., albeit with its own twists, the same can be said for the story. In Braid, you play as Tim, a man who is seeking a princess who has been kidnapped by a monster, according to him. Similar to Super Mario Bros., there aren't really too many major story events that occur during the game. However, unlike Super Mario Bros., there is a bit of context added. At the start of each world, you'll find these tomes containing cryptic messages, hinting at a darker and more complex picture than this straightforward hero rescue princess scenario that you've been presented with. These messages suggest that Tim had a very complicated relationship with the princess, implying that he has dealt with issues such as alcoholism and frequently used his time reversal mechanics to try and undo his mistakes. This ties back into how the game sort of makes you impulsively try to undo all of your mistakes by giving you the ability to reverse time at your will. In essence, you get into the same headspace as Tim, where every single mistake you make is something you have to undo. There are also several visual clues throughout the game that hint at this. This all culminates in the ending section of the game, which you unlock by completing all of the puzzle pieces. In this sequence, you witness the princess fleeing from a knight in shining armor, while you give chase. However, at the end of the sequence you are prompted to use time reversal, and when the sequence plays in reverse, it is revealed that Tim is in fact the antagonist of this story. It implies that his interactions with the princess were abusive, and in fact she is running away from him, with the monster, referred to at the start of the story, being the knight in shining armor coming to rescue her from you. This is a direct subversion of Super Mario Bros., where in that game, finding out that the princess is in another castle at the end of each castle is a sign that Bowser is keeping her out of reach, and you have to keep working harder. In this game, it is revealed you are an abusive stalker, and she is trying to flee from you, which directly challenges the concept of the monomyth and the idea of there being a dragon to slay and a damsel in distress to save. This can also be seen as a subversion of gender archetypes. In her article about Super Mario Bros., Sharon Sherman talks about gender archetypes and how a lot of games are about male player characters going out on a quest to rescue a damsel in distress, with the women typically being reduced to helpless objects in need of saving. To put it bluntly, she says that the lack of a princess is what sets the plot in motion. This implies that the story needs to have traditional gender archetypes, a big strong hero to save the day and a helpless damsel in distress to be saved. It is even suggested that these games are dangerous because they underscore sexual discrimination against women, unquote. Sharon Sherman argues that there is no way to really subvert this trope, as even games that attempt to portray a female hero such as Metroid fall short because there is still an inherent social bias amongst players towards male heroes. I would argue, however, that Braid proves Sharon Sherman wrong. Not in the sense that it turns the princess into an authority figure or someone with their own agency, because it doesn't, but in the sense that it challenges the notion of the archetypal male hero being this virtuous and pure of heart individual who is doing what he's doing out of selflessness rather than selfishness. Tim is someone who has convinced himself that the princess is in danger and in need of saving, because he needs to justify chasing after her. It forces us to question this archetypal plot structure, and it forces us to not just take this black and white narrative at face value, as there is likely more to it than meets the eye. And it does this by presenting the would-be hero as a symptom of toxic masculinity. While this subversive narrative could have easily been achieved in a film or TV show, what I feel really underscores it and makes it really stand out to the audience is the fact that it's a video game. Going back to the idea that there's a psychology behind getting sucked into a video game, we can look at the concept of the self-involving interactive fiction, as outlined by John Robson and Aaron Meskin. Similar to what Austenson and Sherman wrote about this, the authors of the SIIF concept talk about how deeply personal a lot of players feel with the games they play, and how they connect with the player characters in the game. One thing they note is how a lot of people will refer to the player character in the first person when describing something they did in a game. The example they give being, "I was killed by the creeper," referring to the game Minecraft. They essentially view the player character as an extension of themselves, and they see themselves in the player character. While the authors of this piece are more specifically talking about games in which you can customize your own player avatar, I do think that this concept applies to Braid. The reason being that this effectively implicates the player in Tim's outright evil actions as implied in the game. It's one thing to suggest that, oh, the character you've been following this whole time was a bad guy, but it's another thing to be like, no, you have been the bad guy this whole time, which I feel is a very powerful way of making the audience question the traditional archetypal hero as outlined by the monomyth, because they got so sucked up in like, oh, I'm being told that I'm this hero who has to save this princess, that they never stopped to question it or think critically about it, and now we find out that they've actually been an evil person this whole time. To me, this is Braid's smoking gun. It takes this classic story that we all know, the story of Super Mario Bros., or more to the point, the hero's journey, and flips it on its head in order to make the player feel bad about their actions and question their preconceived notions of heroism, and how those beliefs may have been molded by society's uncritical normative gender archetypes. And I firmly believe that this message is communicated as effectively and strongly as it is because of the fact that this is a video game in the platformer genre. a genre that is often seen as very simple, casual, and easygoing, one that seems to not have much going on underneath the surface, which I feel is what makes the fact that there is something deeper going on beneath the surface all the more special.